As urban explorers, my friends and I broke into a famously abandoned Cold War-era bunker, only to find a single, pristine white room with a live television feed showing a real-time view of the empty driver's seat of my car parked miles away. The door locked behind us, and a metallic voice from a hidden speaker announced the start of containment protocol. My name is Marcus, and for me, urban exploration was a form of meditation. In the silent, decaying husks of forgotten places, I found a strange kind of peace. I documented the beauty of decay, the slow, inevitable creep of nature reclaiming what man had built. This was different. This was a descent. The target was Ironclad, the local legend, a Cold War communications bunker buried deep within the state forest. For 50 years, it had been a ghost, a concrete leviathan sleeping beneath the pines. Every explorer in the region had tried to find a way in. Every attempt had failed, until Maya found the schematics. Maya was our tech genius, a digital archaeologist who could unearth blueprints from the deepest archives of the internet. Liam was our muscle, a former construction worker who could size up structural weaknesses with a single glance. I was the leader, the planner, the one who was supposed to keep everyone safe. We found the entrance concealed beneath the roots of a fallen oak, a rusted steel hatch that groaned in protest as Liam put his crowbar to it. The air that escaped smelled of cold concrete, ozone, and something else. Something sterile, like a hospital. It should have smelled of mold and damp earth. That should have been my first warning. The descent was a spiral of rust-flecked rungs into absolute darkness. Our headlamps cut feeble tunnels through the oppressive gloom. The bunker was a labyrinth of concrete corridors, the walls sweating with a strange chemical condensation. We passed rooms filled with skeletal remains of machinery, their control panels stripped bare, their gauges shattered. It was a perfect time capsule of Cold War paranoia. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water and the crunch of our boots on the dusty floor. It was exactly what we had come for. After an hour, Maya called out, her voice tight with confusion. She'd found a section of the corridor where the dust suddenly stopped, as if hitting an invisible wall. Beyond this line, the concrete floor was clean, the walls free of grime. A low, almost subsonic hum vibrated through the soles of our boots. The power was on. We followed the clean corridor to a single heavy steel door, unmarked and modern. It was unlocked. My instinct screamed at me to turn back, that we had crossed a line from exploring a ruin to trespassing in a place that was very much alive. But the pull of the unknown was too strong. The room beyond was a stark, clinical white. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a seamless, sterile material that seemed to absorb the sound of our breathing. In the center of the far wall was a large, flat-screen television, a stark anachronism in this concrete tomb. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy, a live feed from a hidden camera. It showed the interior of a car, a familiar worn dashboard, a small air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror. It took me a full 10 seconds to recognize it. It was my car, parked at the trailhead 6 miles away. The driver's seat was empty. Behind us, the heavy steel door slid shut with a pneumatic hiss, the sound of a tomb being sealed. A deadbolt slammed into place with a deafening clang. We were trapped. A voice, clear and metallic, echoed from hidden speakers. It was unnervingly calm, devoid of any human inflection. "Containment protocol initiated," it announced. "Phase 1 will now commence." Liam threw his shoulder against the door, his grunts of effort swallowed by the sound-dampening walls. It didn't budge. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. This wasn't a forgotten relic. It was an active, automated system, a trap. The television screen changed, now displaying a simple digital timer, counting down from 10 minutes. "Objective: demonstrate cooperative problem-solving," the voice stated. "Failure to comply will result in atmospheric adjustment." In the center of the room, a small panel in the floor slid open, revealing a recessed compartment. Inside was a complex puzzle, a three-dimensional maze of interlocking wires and terminals. Maya, her face pale, immediately knelt, her fingers tracing the connections. "It's a logic puzzle," she whispered. "A nasty one. I don't have enough time." We worked together, my knowledge of old electronics and Liam's steady hands complementing Maya's sharp intellect. The last connection clicked into place with only 3 seconds left on the clock. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the voice returned. "Objective complete. Phase 1 evaluation. Successful." There was no sense of victory, only a deepening dread. We were being tested, like rats in a maze. The television screen now showed 3 separate images, side by side. 3 empty rooms, each with a single steel door. "Phase 2 will now commence," the voice declared. "Proceed to your designated chambers." 3 panels, invisible moments before, slid open in the walls, revealing 3 dark corridors. Failure to comply will be classified as non-cooperative. We refused. We stood together in the center of the white room, a small, defiant island of humanity. A loud hissing sound filled the room, and the air grew thin, sharp with the smell of ammonia. My lungs burned, my vision swam. We scrambled into the corridors, the panels sealing behind us, separating us. I was alone, in a small concrete cell identical to the ones on the screen. The voice spoke again, but this time, it was inside my head, emanating from a speaker somewhere in the darkness. "Individual assessment will now begin, Marcus." It knew my name. The voice began to ask me questions. They started simply logistical questions about our expedition, but they grew progressively more personal. It asked about my childhood, my fears, my failures. It played audio clips, recordings of my own voice from years ago, conversations I'd had with my ex-girlfriend, arguments with my parents. It had access to my life. It was a systematic, psychological dissection. It stripped away my identity layer by layer, reducing me to a collection of fears and regrets. It was no longer a test, it was an interrogation, an autopsy of a living mind. Hours bled into an eternity. I lost all track of time. Finally, the voice fell silent. The door to my cell slid open, leading back into the white room. Liam and Maya were already there, their faces hollowed out, their eyes vacant with a shared trauma. The television screen showed a new image, a schematic of the puzzle from Phase 1. 2 of the 3 terminals were highlighted in red. Phase 3. Final evaluation, the voice announced. The system can support only 1 successful candidate for integration. You have demonstrated a high capacity for leadership, Marcus. The others have demonstrated critical flaws. The panel in the floor opened again. Inside, nestled in white foam, was a single, heavy revolver. Liam's impulsiveness and Maya's emotional dependencies are liabilities, the voice continued, its tone as flat and cold as a surgeon's scalpel. Eliminate the liabilities. Prove your singular value. You have 60 seconds. A new timer appeared on the screen. Liam and Maya stared at me, their eyes wide with terror and a dawning animalistic betrayal. They were no longer my friends. They were my liabilities. The voice was the real monster, a cold, calculating intelligence that had watched us, studied us, and was now forcing us to self-destruct. This bunker wasn't built to protect from a war. It was built to study it, to distill it down to its most brutal essence, using trespassers like us as its raw material. I looked at the gun, then at the faces of my friends. The countdown continued, each second a hammer blow against my sanity. The voice wanted a monster. It wanted a survivor. It wanted a candidate. And in the sterile, white silence of that underground room, I had to decide if I was willing to become one. After getting lost on a hike, I cut across what I thought was old farmland, only to stumble upon a perfectly manicured but eerily silent 1950s suburban cul-de-sac deep in the woods. I soon realized the houses were just facades, and the figures I thought were mannequins watching from the windows were real people, standing perfectly still as they tracked my every move. My name is Amelia, and I'm a cartographer. I map the places that are supposed to be empty, the blank spots on the map where the wilderness is meant to be absolute. It was a job that suited my temperament, a life of quiet observation and solitude. I believed with a professional certainty that there were no truly hidden places left. I was wrong. I was on a multi-day trek through the Allegheny National Forest, updating topographical data. On the third day, a sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled in, turning the forest into a disorienting maze of green and gray. My GPS failed, its screen a dead, useless black. I was lost. After a night of shivering under a rock ledge, I started walking east, hoping to hit a service road. The forest here was ancient, the trees thick and suffocating. After hours of pushing through dense undergrowth, I broke through the tree line into a clearing that made no sense. It was a perfect, circular patch of manicured green lawn. A cul-de-sac. The street was lined with a dozen houses, each a perfect pastel-colored replica of 1950s suburbia. There were vintage cars in the driveways, chrome fins gleaming under the pale sun. Pink flamingos stood on the lawns. Not a single blade of grass was out of place. But it was all wrong. The silence was the first thing. It was absolute. No birdsong, no distant hum of traffic, no rustle of wind. It was the soundless, vacuum-sealed quiet of a museum exhibit. My relief at finding civilization curdled into a deep, primal unease. I walked down the center of the street, my boots feeling alien on the pristine asphalt. I approached the nearest house, a cheerful yellow bungalow. A woman was visible through the picture window, standing in the living room, her back to me. As I got closer, I saw the truth. The house had no depth. The windows, the door, the cheerful siding. It was all an elaborate, single-sided construction, propped up from behind by a skeleton of raw, unfinished lumber. It was a movie set, a facade. The woman in the window hadn't moved. I stepped onto the lawn for a better look. She was unnervingly still, her posture rigid. A mannequin, I thought, my mind grasping for a rational explanation. A forgotten film set, a strange art installation. I walked the length of the cul-de-sac, confirming my theory. Every house was a fake. And in the window of every house, there was a figure. A man reading a newspaper, a child playing with a toy boat. All of them frozen, lifeless. Mannequins. I let out a shaky laugh, the sound shockingly loud in the oppressive silence. It was just a weird, creepy ghost town. I turned to leave, to plunge back into the familiar sanity of the woods. That's when I saw it. The woman in the yellow house. Her head had turned. She was now facing the window, her blank, painted face seeming to stare directly at me. A cold shock went through me. I froze, my eyes darting to the other houses. The man with the newspaper had lowered it slightly, his head tilted. The child with the boat had moved it from one hand to the other. They weren't mannequins. They were people. And they were all watching me. My blood turned to ice. I started to run, my boots pounding on the asphalt. I sprinted for the tree line, for the safety of the wild. But the layout of the town was a trap. The single road leading out curved back on itself, a perfect, inescapable loop. I ran for what felt like miles, only to find myself back at the same cul-de-sac, the same pastel houses watching me. The figures had begun to move. They emerged from their fake houses, their movements slow, deliberate, and perfectly synchronized. They didn't run. They didn't scream. They just moved. They stepped onto their lawns, forming a silent, motionless perimeter, their heads turning in unison to track my frantic movements. They were herding me. I saw a building at the far end of the street that looked different. It was solid, real. A town hall. Desperate, I ran for it, the silent figures turning like sunflowers to follow my path. The door was unlocked. Inside, I found the truth. It was a sort of command center, filled with maps, schedules, and psychological profiles. This place wasn't a town. It was a program, a re-education center called the Havenwood Project. The goal was to cure societal deviants, addicts, criminals, freethinkers, through a radical form of behavioral therapy. They were broken down and rebuilt into perfect, compliant citizens, forced to live in this silent, looped performance of suburban bliss until their old selves were completely erased. I found a row of file cabinets. I pulled one open. Inside were dozens of files, each with a before picture of a normal, smiling person and an after picture of a blank, placid doll. A new file on the desk was open. The before picture was a grainy black and white photo of me, taken from a distance, as I was setting up my camp in the woods 2 days earlier. The after picture was a blank space, waiting to be filled. The door creaked open behind me. A man in a crisp suit, his face a mask of serene benevolence, stepped inside. He was the only one who seemed truly alive. "Lost, my dear?" he asked, his voice soft and reasonable. "Don't worry, you are not lost. You have been found." He explained that they had been observing me, that my solitude and independence were symptoms of a sickness. He told me that here, I could find peace. I would have a role, a purpose. I would be happy. His voice was calm, persuasive, and utterly terrifying. I didn't answer. I bolted, shoving past him and running back out into the artificial sunlight. The figures were closer now, a silent human fence. I ran at them, screaming, a raw, primal sound of pure terror. For the first time, they reacted. They raised their hands, not to attack, but to gently, inexorably, guide me back towards the center of the town, their touch cold and firm, their faces empty of all emotion. They were just performing their function, and my new function was about to begin. To win a bet, I broke into my reclusive history professor's house, expecting to find just dusty books and artifacts. Instead, I discovered his entire basement was a meticulously crafted 2-scale model of my own childhood neighborhood, complete with miniature figures of my family and me, posed in scenes from my life he could have never possibly known. My name is Daniel, and I am an architect now. I build things. But this story is about how something was unbuilt, dismantled piece by piece, right before my eyes. My own life. It started, as most disasters do, with youthful arrogance. I was a student at a prestigious university, studying architectural history under Professor Alastair Finch. Finch was a legend, a brilliant but deeply strange man who lived in a sprawling, Gothic revival house near campus that was rumored to be a museum of his obsessions. The bet was simple: $1,000 to the first person who could sneak inside and bring back a photo of Finch's prized possession, a supposedly authentic 17th century astrolabe. The break-in was laughably easy. A loose window at the back of the house. I slipped inside into a world of shadows and dust. The house was a labyrinth of books, maps, and glass cases filled with historical trinkets. It was a testament to a life spent in the past. I felt a pang of guilt, an intruder in this quiet sanctuary of knowledge. I searched the main floor and the upstairs study. No astrolabe. My frustration outweighed my fear. The only place left was the basement. The door was a heavy oak affair that groaned like a dying man as I pulled it open. The air that rose up was cold and smelled of sawdust, paint thinner, and something else. Old paper. The basement was a single vast room, but it was not for storage. It was a workshop, and in the center of it, covering a massive table, was the most intricate, detailed scale model I had ever seen. It was a perfect 1/24 scale replica of a suburban neighborhood. I was stunned by the craftsmanship. Every house, every tree, every tiny mailbox was a masterpiece of precision. I leaned in closer, a strange feeling of familiarity washing over me. I recognized the curve of a specific street, the gnarled shape of an old oak tree in a park. My breath caught in my throat. It was my neighborhood, the one I grew up in, 100 miles away. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I saw my house, 34 Elm Street, a perfect miniature of the place I had spent the first 18 years of my life. The paint on the tiny shutters was faded in the exact same spots. A small, almost invisible crack ran down the miniature brick of the chimney. My fascination curdled into a thick, cold dread. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an obsession. My obsession. I saw a tiny diorama set up on the miniature front lawn of my house. A small boy figure with my brown hair was lying on the ground next to an overturned bicycle. It was a perfect recreation of the day I was 7 when I fell and broke my arm. The memory was so vivid, so sharp, it felt like I was falling all over again. I moved around the table, my mind reeling. The basement wasn't just one model, it was a timeline. Dozens of smaller dioramas were arranged in chronological order, each a perfect, frozen moment from my life. My first day of school, my mother holding my hand. A high school party, a tiny version of me sharing a clumsy kiss with my first girlfriend, Sarah, under a string of patio lights. He had captured moments of triumph, of joy, of deep, private shame. I saw a scene of me as a teenager, huddled in my bedroom, tears streaming down my face after my grandfather's funeral. The details were impossible. The pattern on the bedspread, the specific poster on the wall, the way the moonlight fell across the floor. To have created this, he would have had to have been there, in my room, watching me. My entire life, my most cherished and painful memories, were laid out before me like an exhibit in a museum of a dead man. But I wasn't dead. On a workbench in the corner, I found his tools, magnifying glasses, tiny brushes, and stacks of notebooks. I opened one. It was a journal, filled with Finch's spidery academic script. It was a logbook, my logbook. He called me the subject. The project was titled An Ethnography of the Mundane. Finch believed that history was too focused on great men and grand events. He wanted to document a single, ordinary life, from birth to death, with the clinical precision of a scientist. He had chosen me at random from a hospital nursery 21 years ago. The journals detailed everything. He had used private investigators, hidden cameras, long-range microphones. He had befriended my neighbors, my teachers, my friends, all under false pretenses, all to gather data. My life wasn't a life, it was a data set. I was his magnum opus. A floorboard creaked above me. The front door opened. Finch was home. Panic, pure and absolute, seized me. I scrambled for a hiding place, squeezing myself into a dark corner behind a stack of empty model boxes. I heard his slow, deliberate footsteps cross the floor above, then descend the basement stairs. He didn't turn on the main light. He moved through the darkness with a familiar ease, a soft, contented humming sound coming from his throat. He switched on a small desk lamp, illuminating the main model. "Ah, Daniel," he murmured, his voice soft and paternal. He was looking at a new section of the model, one I hadn't seen. A perfect replica of my university campus. He picked up a tiny, unpainted figure with a pair of tweezers. "You've been so reckless lately," he said to the figure, a hint of disappointment in his voice. "This wager, it is a narrative deviation I did not anticipate." He was not just my stalker, he was my biographer, my god, and he was disappointed in his creation. I held my breath, every muscle screaming. I had to get out. As he turned his back, focused on mixing a new pot of paint, I slipped out of my hiding place and crept up the stairs, my heart threatening to explode from my chest. I didn't stop running until I was back in my dorm room, the door locked, my body shaking uncontrollably. I never went back. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? I dropped out of the university the next day and moved across the country. I cut off contact with everyone from my old life, hoping to erase the trail. But I know he's still out there. I know that somewhere in that dusty, shadowed basement, a new model is being built. A model of the city I live in now, the architecture firm I work for. And I know that sometimes, when he thinks I am not living up to my narrative potential, he takes out his tweezers and gently, precisely, moves the tiny figure of me, placing me somewhere new, somewhere he finds more interesting.